and welcome back to True Crime with me, Emma Kenny. Thanks for joining me. I've got a really interesting case today. Actually, it's a really recent one, so hopefully it's not going to be one that you've seen, but for those of you in the UK who've heard about it, I'm imagining that you'll be absolutely stunned by the needless killing of the two sisters that I'm going to talk about. Big shout out to all of you for your support. It means the world to me. Thank you so much for those of you supporting me over on Patreon. Hopefully you're enjoying my incredible podcasts. I can say that because I don't speak in them. I just let somebody else speak in them, and they do a very, very good job. So I've had a DCI, I've got an undercover police officer who was unbelievable, was known as the real Donnie Brasco in the UK. And also I'm gonna have a barrister on quite soon to talk about criminal cases. I've also got a forensic psychologist who's gonna be coming on, pulling in favours, guys, pulling in favours from me mates. But it means that those of you who are supporting me do kind of get some content that you value because you keep telling me that you do, and also that I feel that you benefit from because of obviously the extra bits of support that you give me. But again, I'm going to say it like I do every time, if you can't afford to, just don't. It'll be fine. I'm always going to be doing this no matter what. However, like I said, very much appreciated. Hope we're all okay. The actual case I'm going to be talking about today is that of Danyal Hussein. It's going to be a ride, it really is. This took a long time to research. It's a relatively new case, and that means that there isn't super amounts of information that are accessible. And I wanted to make sure that, because it's such a devastating impact for any family, isn't it, when somebody gets murdered? It's horrific. But this is two sisters from the same family who were murdered on the same night. So you have to just imagine the incredible loss to the family, and making sure that I did the case diligently enough so that if they stumble upon it, they don't feel that I've rushed through it or made mistakes or not paid attention to the detail. Because like I said, whenever I do these cases, I'm always really aware that these are people's lives and the victims' families really have meaning. So I do hope you feel I've done it justice at the end of this. So who was Danyal Hussein? Let's look at him first. Well, he was born the 10th of May, 2002. So he's a young guy. Bear in mind, it's 2021. He was of Iraqi descent, and he grew up in Blackheath, which is the southeast of London, and he was the eldest of 4 siblings. When neighbours talk about what the household was like, they said it was a very noisy household, had a lot of screaming and shouting. So we could say that from an outside looking in, there was potential dysfunction in the family, in the fact that it was obviously quite a conflictual household. That noted, my neighbours did apparently say to my mother that when they heard me scream, they could hear me at the end of the road, and it was a relatively long road. So it doesn't mean you live in an unhappy home. If there's 4 siblings, chances are they're going to want to get on top of each other where conflict is concerned and escalate, and often you can live in an incredibly happy home and still have conflict. I know that a lot of you listening will be like, that's my home, and there's nothing wrong with that. But for the neighbours, that's the comments that they've made. And some of the more worrying observations that they did come out with was the fact that they do recall the police and the ambulances attending the address on several occasions. So I think that's where we draw a distinction, because family conflict is just part and parcel of an everyday experience. Like I said, we've all been there. Some of us caused it. I'm not looking at anybody in particular because there is not a mirror here. But realistically, if there are ambulances and police turning up, that's kind of high level. So whatever was happening in the home, it was getting out of hand. And it also makes me think, who was calling the ambulance? Who was calling the police? Was it the family members? Was somebody afraid in that home? Or was it neighbours who were concerned about what was going on? Now, Danyal's parents split up when he's in his early teens. So this is 2 issues. This could be, was there some real problems in that household? So with the police and ambulances coming, were there things going on with his parents that were deeply problematic that led to that split? I'm making assumptions of possibility here. I'm not saying this is absolutely correct, but arguably that demonstrates that there were problems. The other side of that as well is he's in his early teens. So children who are in their early teens, they are hit hard by divorce. And that's not to make anybody feel guilty out there who's going through divorce, because you will know how hard it is for teenagers when that occurs. It's not ideal, none of us want that to happen, but the consequences of unhappy relationships are people need to get away. And for any young person dealing with that, it's a complete transition in their life. And it's one that's very, very difficult to help them work through, because as a parent, you're dealing with your own heartbreak and own heartache. You're also dealing with the financial implications of a split. It can be a very difficult time for all parties involved, but that's going to cause a fracture. He then started to divide his time between his mother's address in South East London and his father's home in Wembley. As most of you will be aware, in the UK at least, we do 50-50 on the whole. So when people split up, the kids kind of go half the time with the parent and half the time with the other parent. And that apparently is, well, as far as research is concerned, the best way forward for them. At school, I'm going to be honest with you, this is taken from people who knew him. So the word that I'm going to assign is not a word that I would necessarily use, but I'm going to use the word that was given by the people who were interviewed about this. They said that he was known for being quite creepy around his friends, and also he was incredibly awkward with girls. And this is important to note because this is a theme within what I'm going to talk about. So he struggled to make relationships with girls. He was interested in that, he wanted them, but his personality didn't seem to fit a paradigm where people warmed to him. And as I've noted, people who looked into the relationships that he had at school said that even with friends, he was a very creepy individual. He also seemed to become more and more isolated. Now think about people like Jeffrey Dahmer, Nielsen, many of our serial killers. I'm giving them as examples because we've got a lot of research and information on the kind of histories that they have. They became lonely and loners as they grew up. They found it difficult at times to fit into relationships. And it was noted by people who knew him that he had this kind of strange habit where he'd just kind of wander off. So he didn't know how to socialize, and he struggled to connect in ways that meant that he felt held in the relationships around him, which would be difficult. At this point, he's diagnosed with a mild form of autism. Now, obviously, people who have autism are not going out harming people. That is just not true. But nonetheless, we have to highlight it because when you think about foundational issues and ingredients of possibility, well, of course, if you struggle to communicate with people around you, then it's going to be harder for you to build relationships. And if you're finding it difficult to build relationships, there's going to be a level of frustration. And particularly when you think about a developing young man, interested in girls, sexually becoming aware, these are problems because it means that you have these barriers. And when we have barriers, we either want to smash them down or to some degree we feel controlled by them. Either way, it can cause some pretty challenging emotions to deal with. It's also worth knowing that even though I'm going to talk about probably one of the most hideous murders that I have discussed, he actually had no previous criminal convictions at the time of carrying out these attacks. So Hussein hadn't been involved in the criminal system when he went ahead and murdered two completely innocent women in the most terrifying of contexts. We don't see an escalation. We just see this absolute origin of violence. What I would say is that as a young person, he was interested in things that we would associate with potential violence. So when he's 15, he starts accessing far-right material on the actual computers at Thomas Tallis School in Kidbrooke, Greenwich. Not the most sensible thing to do, because obviously, if you're looking at radicalisation information online of any type, when you're in school, it's going to get noted. So the school goes ahead and reports to the government's counter-terrorism unit that this young man is accessing this kind of material. And there's a program called the PREVENT program. And the PREVENT program is obviously trying to identify young people who are at risk of radicalisation. So they do a brilliant job there. The fact that the school note that this has occurred and then try to get some help for him is powerful testimony to the school acting accordingly and safeguarding that child. This is done in October 2017, so we're talking only a few years ago. And the consequences of that mean that he's going to be highlighted as a potential young person at risk. And that's really important because if you're at risk and you get the right support, hopefully that's going to de-escalate that potential problem. He gets discharged from that program in May 2018. Now, again, I'm really glad that he got help. I'm not sure that October 2017 to May 2018 is a substantial amount of time to make a decision that this young person is not at risk, but they obviously felt that he was somebody who didn't pose a threat, and they said there was no outstanding concerns regarding violent extremism or terrorism. Now, after his discharge from that programme, he does carry on getting assessed to some degree and is referred to the Channel programme. Now, the Channel programme is slightly different. It's a voluntary programme. It's a strand that goes under the Prevent strategy. And this Prevent programme is described by the police as an appropriate support and intervention for him. So Danyal is getting some kind of support and clearly has been now identified as an individual with potential. And it is worrying when you actually think about a young person of his age group going and looking specifically at information. In this case, it's far-right information. He's trying to explore a potential route to deal with some of his emotional discourse. And we see that a great deal with individuals who are seeking this kind of connection. They're looking to belong somewhere. Belongingness and connectedness is something that every single human being requires. And hopefully, for the most part, we get it from people that we love, or we get it from people that in the long term we finally meet and fall in love with and then create our own units of support. But if you are without that, we can see huge ramifications for problematic behaviour, or obviously great vulnerability in individuals that feel that they're completely alone. But in this case, it feels like he's looking for something because he's so unhappy about the certain circumstances that are in his world, and that will play out more as I talk about this. He then goes on to enrol to study A-levels. This is at Orpington College, but even though he's enrolled, and I imagine that's probably through pressure from family and friends because it's what young people do, he just doesn't commit. So he really rarely attends. He literally, in his time being enrolled at college, went 3 or 4 occasions. He also had these plans because he was thinking about potential escape, I would imagine, just changing his life, switching it up, doing something different. And his big dream is to go to the United States to attend summer camp. So there is definitely fleeting moments of hope in this young man. These dreams, these aspirations, they are there. But for whatever reason, in spite of the fact that those ideas exist within him, he chooses a completely other path, a very, very dark path. And that dark path is influenced full of extremist ideology. And it's almost as if that connection that he made with that kind of information earlier on in his experience as a young person just stuck with him. So even though he'd had this help and intervention, it just didn't leave. And he starts to think more and more about returning to that belief system and really starting to engage with the potentials that it holds for him. He spends a huge amount of time on the dark web. And just to put it out there, because I don't think people know what the dark web is. I mean, I think that we've all heard about certain ideas behind what is available on there. Guns, drugs, sex trafficking, all of that definitely exists there. It's also why things like Bitcoin was created, because people wanted to have cashless transactions. Although, god damn it, I wish I'd got in on the Bitcoins about 12 years ago. I'd be a millionaire. I'd probably be a billionaire, wouldn't I? I'd be sat now in a castle, probably draped in gold. It's like a big crown on my head, queen of my own environment. But the point is, I didn't, and I don't understand cryptocurrency. I don't even know how to get into it. But nonetheless, with Bitcoin, that was why it was created, and it was an effective way of, shall we say, doing less than above board deals. But there isn't just the dark web, there's the deep dark web. So 5% they believe is Google, etc. And 95% of it is just full of this murky undercurrent of what lies beneath. And it's a very dangerous place and space. And of course, you can get into there with things like Tor when you download that. People are like, hang on a minute, just gonna have a look at that. I'm joking, I don't think any of you are gonna go on and start going on the dark web. But the point is, it's very easy to access. You know, young people, particularly tech savvy ones, know how to do it. And he starts really engaging in this. And there starts to also build this fixation. He's got this fixation about winning the lottery and also gaining sexual potency. So managing to become attractive to the opposite sex. Now, I will admit that if you follow me on Twitter, you will occasionally see me wishing that I'm going to win the Euro Millions. I am going to note that £168 million is the one that I always think is going to happen for me. So I am quite happy for people to also win it, but that's mine. The 168 million, that's coming to me. So a lot of us have those dreams, don't we? We have the idea that winning the lottery would be amazing. But for most of us, it's just that kind of playing with it in our heads, enjoying the idea of what you would do with it, thinking about all those people would regret not being very nice to you as you give out your £1 million checks to people that you care for. But the truth is that there's nothing wrong with that. It's a part of fantasy play that most of us use. But it's more than that for him. You know, he becomes obsessed with it. And aside from this growing fixation and obsession with becoming sexually attractive and becoming wealthy, he starts becoming really obsessed with demonology and the occult. So he starts to, shall we say, as Richard Ramirez would have put it, explore the violent delights of that area. Also, it's important to note that psychologically, there has been found to be a crossover between the elements of the extreme right wing and certain forms of Satanism. So there is a kind of mirroring, matching, and crossing of those particular issues. And he started to watch very violent Satanist material online. This is not for the faint-hearted. And I know that young people often will explore things that we wouldn't like them to explore. I mean, most of us, if we've got teenagers, we know that they're looking at porn. We know that they're exploring themselves in ways that we might not wish to know about. But it's another level. You know, Satanistic material is about as dark as it can get. I mean, I'm not a person who's too superstitious. Okay, so I do actually salute at magpies when I see one on its own, but that is my friend Jenny Nightingale's fault and not mine. She made me believe that I needed to do that so that I didn't get any bad luck. But for the most part, after saying that, I just really do sound really superstitious, but I'm not that superstitious. But I would never look at things like Satanistic material because I just kind of think it's invoking something that I don't feel comfortable with. Like, I like light and consciousness continuing and beautiful heaven and all the things that are gorgeous about that. And I don't like the idea of head spinning, projectile vomiting, and people floating around rooms. Not floating either. That sounds very heaven-like, doesn't it? I don't know, like levitating as the head spins round. Is it just me who's watched too many of those films? Probably. So this kind of material is something that we don't want our kids involved in, and he's there looking at it and obsessing about it. Also, that he gets involved in this online forum, and this forum is run by Utah-based Matthew Lawrence. Now, he's also known as EA Coating, and he's basically a self-styled black magician and a really high-ranking member of the Satanist Order of 9 Angels. And what you have on that forum is just such extremely violent material. It's advocating the absolute worst of the worst. It's talking about wanting to get involved in child murder, sexual violence, and the guy running this also has got convictions for drugs and weapon possession offences. So we are talking big problems in this world. And if you're going to find a mentor, you're going to want a mentor that makes you feel that your ideas, your passions, your beliefs are validated. And most of us do that by following, I don't know, people like Martin Luther King, Gandhi, you know, the good guys. But when you're looking for those kind of dark things, you're going to find people who reflect it. And it's like Daniel finds it perfectly in this place. And that forum is bizarre. I mean, what even gets people to go online and start these forums? Years ago, if you had a weird predilection for anything, you'd be like, the fact that no one else seems to be involved in this or think this is cool or looks at me really weird when I say anything about it is probably enough to make me think that I need to work on this. Maybe I need to go for some therapy. Maybe I need to avoid getting involved in said behaviours. But nowadays, you just go on Google, type it in, and you can bet your bottom dollar there'll be somebody with a forum doing it. And the problem with that is that it validates and permission bases the behaviour. It allows people to think, well, if all those people are doing it, that should be okay. The fact that you might only have 500 people in that forum out of 7.6 billion people in the world, which should make you go, oh, that seems like quite a low statistic. Maybe I should stay away from this behavior. And that's not the way it's going to work. Because you're going to experience confirmation bias. You're just going to look and say, well, these people all agree with me, therefore what I think is right. And that's a massive problem per se in any of these extremist areas, because you're always going to find people who validate you, even when what they should be doing is challenging your beliefs. So this forum, it provides instructions for evil pacts. It encourages murder. And you think about Danyal Hussein, he's looking for some kind of outlet for his growing rage. He's feeling highly discontented in his life. He's feeling angry with women in particular, because of course women are rebuffing him, they're rejecting him. He's not getting that sexual prowess that he's desiring. And there are posts that obviously Lawrence has made. He does things like advise people to study terrorist methods. He quotes Moore's murderer Ian Brady and states, always remember the first rule of murder. Never kill a person that you have a reason to kill. Think about that again. Always remember the first rule of murder. Never kill a person that you have a reason to kill. Now, if you think about that psychologically, what is it trying to project to you? It's saying that if you kill somebody that you have a reason to kill, well, that's not cold-blooded. Even at times it could seem justified, because you're reacting to something within you. Maybe they've harmed somebody that you love, maybe they deserve it, hence they're in prison and you're going to put them to death, and so on and so forth. But if you want to truly be an individual with cold blood running through your veins, kill somebody that doesn't deserve it, that you have no relationship with, that you have no reason at all to kill, that is a complete innocent. Because if you're willing to kill somebody who's a complete innocent, you're proving that depth of depravity, that willingness within you to turn to the dark side. And that's clearly why that quote resonates. What's unbelievable about Danyal Hussein is when we actually reflect on what happens, he basically follows Lawrence's instructions for entering into a pact with a demon that then leads to the behaviors that I'm going to talk about a little bit later on. So he literally follows Lawrence's words to the letter. Hussein remains on that forum for 2 years. And during this period of time, he starts asking other people questions about demonic pacts. So he's trying to get advice and guidance of these individuals. Now, I don't know, for most of us, I think the idea of demonic pacts just makes you go, watched a few too many horror movies, needs to calm down with his fantasies, it's not real, and so on and so forth. But for individuals who are seeking this kind of liberation, I know that's an unusual word to use, but I'm saying that when people are looking at making pacts with the devil, it's about a sense of psychological liberation from the reality of the world that they're living in and the way that they're having to live within it. If you don't feel that you are special, and you think there is a shortcut to being special, and you're not thinking about the next life, you're thinking about this, then sacrificing something in the future for something in the present, which means that you have a freedom as you wish it to be, as opposed to how it really is, then you're going to feel a sense of freedom when you make that kind of pact, if you believe in it. Because you're going to think, well, if I do this, I'll be rewarded. And whilst that is so far outside the realm of ration for most well-adjusted human beings, if you just look at your world and think, I would do anything to change this, I would do anything to achieve what I believe would make my life good, then you are really vulnerable. And then you're getting radicalized by these individuals who can see that vulnerability and probably also enjoy the way that they feel hero worshipped by a young person. And suddenly we have this perfect synergy of possibility, don't we, for really terrible things to play out. It's around this time as well that Danyal Hussein starts claiming that he's a psychic vampire. Is it just me? What happened to the good old days when a vampire just used to suck your blood? I mean, who needs a psychic vampire? In any way, everyone's a psychic vampire to some degree if they're a vampire, aren't they? Because just before you suck somebody's blood, you'd be like, I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, bloody hell, I'm going to get killed by a vampire. I mean, is that psychic or is that just legitimate reality? I preferred the good old days of Salem's Lot where they just had to ask permission to get into your house before they then sucked your blood. And it was done. No one needs a vampire doing their tarot cards or runes or palm, do they? Is it just me? No. But anyway, for Danyal, it's not enough to just be an eternal being who lives forever, rampaging through villages and sucking the blood of anyone that they can connect with. No, he has to be one who's also psychic. I digress. I'll move on. It just sticks with me. I think it's a strange thing for Danyal Hussein to do. Nonetheless, also suggests that there may be some mental health issues going on. I appreciate that. Or, you know, young people do those things, don't they? They do say those things, they do make those things up. I've actually worked on a TV show where I went and hung out with a group of people who thought they were vampires and they drank each other's blood. They were very nice. I wouldn't have wanted to stay on my own for a while with them because you never know where that could end. All I'm saying is, when you're young, sometimes you have these ideas, and I think that Danyal Hussein could have just been playing with those ideas. It might not be that he had a serious mental illness. I cannot comment. It is just me anecdotally expressing that potential. Now, it's also worth noting that Danyal Hussein's father starts getting really concerned about him at this point, and neighbours of the family said that it was something that his father surfaced because he felt that he'd fallen in with a bad crowd, which he was right about. But I guess it's kind of quite challenging for a parent because when a child is on the web a great deal, you don't have a lot of control over what they're searching. It's easy for them to cover up what they're doing. On top of that, they're in their rooms often, so you don't feel that they're in danger outside. And this is one of the big problems with the online world. People do get radicalized. People do get horrible experiences with predators happening to them, and parents think that they're safe. But there was something instinctually that Danyal Hussein's father could see changing. He could see that there was something deeply concerning about his behaviour. Now, Hussein belonged to a minority of Satanists who are firstly far right and secondly violent. I know that might seem strange because when you think about Satanists, you're like, aren't they all a bit violent? Aren't they all a bit far right? But no, not all are. But there are particular segments of Satanism which are. So imagine the spectrum of, oh, I like a bit of the dark arts and I believe in the devil, to let's go and eat a baby. That's the spectrum. So he's on that side of the spectrum where he thinks that violence and far-right activity is the way forward. And they kind of cross and synergize in that way. And they kind of are good bedfellows, aren't they? Because they hold some very extreme views that are really negative towards certain populations. So that synergizes that particular connection. Now, whilst developing these very dark interests, he's constantly looking at far-right and violent satanic material online. And it's quite surprising, but he starts considering himself as an Aryan. So he's looking at himself as essentially a Nazi. And if you think about the Aryan race, there was a very specific belief system about what they would look like, and it was blonde and blue-eyed. It was something that Hitler was bizarrely fixated with. He believed that blonde, blue-eyed people were stronger. Completely incorrect, actually. But then when did Hitler ever worry about getting things right? Although he was a vegetarian, which has always worried me. However, it does show you that there's a level of disassociation between Danyal Hussein's reality and his fantasy. Because, of course, when you think about the far right, with respect, a lot of those far right extremists are not very nice to people who do not fit a white paradigm. So that demonstrates that there must be something deeply conflictual for Hussein. The fact that he's even trying to fit in an area where arguably he'd never be accepted. Even though Danyal Hussein is a young man at this point, let me tell you, he is ruthless. When I describe the crime that he carries out, you will know, apart from it being fully bloodthirsty, the other side is that it was totally self-serving, massively egocentric, completely without empathy and emotion, and without any concern or compassion for the individuals whose lives he'd steal. It was basically, he wanted something. It didn't matter how outlandish it was, it didn't matter how far-fetched, he wanted something. And as far as he was concerned, he would do anything to achieve it. And he was willing to give blood offerings and sacrifices in return to achieve what he wanted. He vowed, absolutely vowed, that what he wanted to do was carry out a campaign of vengeance against random women. That was one of his big things. He had this rage, this incandescent anger with women. Because of course, you know, if a woman doesn't want to sleep with you, then you should murder them. And I say that because there is a growing number of men in our society, and you know me guys, I love men. My dad was a great one. My husband's a good one. He's a great one as well. My kids are the best. I cannot tell you how much I love being surrounded by men. I know the vast majority of men are wonderful humans, do anything for you. But I'm sorry, there is a growing number of young men out there who are literally convinced that women deserve to be basically kept in prisons for their own pleasure. This exists online. And so there is this growing permission base for completely inappropriate and unacceptable behaviour and misogyny that is pretty terrifying. Now, the reality is that these men are inadequate. They are insecure. They are usually quite flawed in their personality, and they therefore don't come across as very attractive. And I'm sorry, it's difficult, isn't it, to hear that, because it's judgmental, but it's actually real. You know, they are inadequate, they are insecure, and they need to work on it. It's not women's fault that they can't get them into bed. You know, you need a bit of character, bit of charm, bit of intrigue. You need all of those things, and to do that, you just have to work on your confidence a bit, don't you? But a lot of people are projecting that, and these men are projecting it onto females and saying, well, they should be sleeping with me. They don't see that they have to engage in a respectful manner. But he fits this paradigm. And it feels like that rage, that rejection that he believes is occurring from women towards him turns into something really, really dark. So he decides that the way to manage this rejection, this not being able to connect with women, this desire to achieve all of the things that he wants in his life, wealth, sexual contact, and so on and so forth. The way to do that is to go on a really good life coaching course, to spend time working on his confidence and figuring out what it is that is making him go, that didn't happen, did it? No, it didn't happen. Instead, he makes a pact with the mighty king, Lucifuge Rothical. Genuinely, that's what he did. Now, just to let you know what that means, because I had to look it up. The name is derived from two words, lux, meaning light, and fugio, to flee, which means he who flees from the light. In demonology, that character I've just described is a powerful demon king. He can bring incredible wealth to those who invoke him. He's also said to be the demon in charge of hell's government and treasury. I'm wondering whether he's currently in charge of ours. I don't know. Maybe he's also in charge of our government and treasury. I joke, I jest. So Hussein writes up an agreement and he makes this pact with this particular demon in which he promises to make 6 female sacrifices every 6 months whilst he remains physically able and at liberty. And he's also going to build a temple for Lucifuge. So he's kind of saying, if you let me enjoy my life, if you let me achieve all of my dreams, then I will do this consistently for you whilst building a temple for you. And that will be my pact. Now, in return, he wants something back from this demon. And he wants him to allow him to win Mega Millions super jackpot, never to be investigated or suspected by the police, and also to have endless wealth and power. It would have been okay, wouldn't it, if that was just fantasy play? You know, if he was just allowing himself to dream about those potentials and possibilities. It's mind-blowing to me when somebody can take a feeling, project it into a certain circumstance, such as doing this invocation, but then from there, actually action it. That shedding of their conscience, that final decision to go ahead and do harm is something that stuns me every time I cover it. Because It's inescapably harrowing to imagine that you can go from thinking about something so dreadful to actually committing something so catastrophic and dreadful. And Danyal Hussein clearly believes that this is going to play out. He puts these ideas into action. So on the 4th of June, he sets up an online lottery account. 7th of June, he places 5 Mega Millions bets and 1 Mega Millions syndicate bet. That totals £17.50. On the 9th of June, buys 3 Euro Millions tickets and a syndicate ticket for £12.50. 13th of June, he buys various online scratch card games, and he follows Lawrence's advice from the forums to a T. He enters a pact with Lucifuge, he asks for wealth, and he signs it in blood. In another note, he makes a pact with Demon Queen Byleth. Now, for this, he wants a girl at school to find him really sexually attractive, and he wants her to fall deeply in love with him. He also asks that this girl believes that he is the only one for her, and he wants to be more generally attractive to women romantically. I think at this point we can have some empathy and sympathy with those feelings. Of course, it's really challenging when you find yourself in a situation where other people don't tend to notice you or find you attractive, and I can understand that that would be very upsetting for him. And even the idea that he wished for some fantasy thinking, some magical thinking to have this change. But obviously he's doing this with really dark tenets of behaviour, and we should be deeply concerned that firstly he thinks that he can give his power away to these demons to achieve what he wishes, because that is not an empowered state, it's actually a helpless state. You're saying, I have no power in my world, I need to do this so that my world can change. It's the absolute opposite of being empowered and confident and managing your life with agency. It's totally feeling redundant. There is nothing you can do. You have to give yourself away to a higher power, or a darker power in this context. Now, the way that he's going to make good on his promise with this particular demon, he says that he's going to burn incense in her name, he's going to offer some sweet drink and chocolate, and he's also going to offer some blood. I mean, I think by this point we all know where this is going. This is a young man with huge issues, a great deal of potential, and his behaviour that plays out is going to evidence that. I genuinely can also say that when you think about what he's said, he's clearly intending to be a serial killer. 6 women in 6 months, and that was just the first group of killings that he was intending to carry. So we know that this is something he's thinking about for the long term. He starts buying tools because he knows that he's going to start carrying out these murders. So on the 3rd of June 2020, he orders quite a few items from Amazon. These include a full face balaclava, 2 folding shovels. Later that same day, he goes to Asda and he buys a block of 5 knives and 2 candles, because Lawrence in his forum advises that PACT should be entered only in candlelight. So he's going ahead and creating this ingredients list that is going to be required to connect with these demons and to do these things. He uses his passport as proof of age when he's buying the knives, and he actually has to take off the face mask at the cash desk to buy them, all caught on CCTV. Another really clever killer. Sorry for sarcasm, this is a very serious issue, but they aren't very bright, are they? Asda has a lot of bright light per se, and cameras everywhere. So the fact that he's actually physically gone and bought them and had to show his age instantly banged to rights, yeah? They've got him in that respect if they start tracking his behaviour. Should have gone to eBay. But you know what I'm saying? This is not a sophisticated belief system. And we can ask ourselves, well, why? Well, maybe because he's so indoctrinated, he's so radicalised by this far-right Satanism group that he doesn't think he's going to have to worry about consequences. Because after all, if you sold your soul to the devil, if demons are controlling your potential and future, then you're going to imagine that they're going to be able to protect you, right? So maybe he isn't necessarily consequentially thinking in the way that we would expect him to. He also bought so much stuff that he couldn't even fit everything in his backpack, so he ends up carrying some of the stuff in a plastic bag instead. Later that same evening, he goes back to Asda again and he buys power tape. And this means that he's planning. No, this isn't something that he buys and then carries out a crime. We're weeks before he actually carries out the murders. So this is very much premeditated. 2 weeks after he's bought all those items, he's obviously been ruminating about the fact that it's potentially going to expose him. He's realised he's on CCTV, he's bought knives, so he comes up with, he would imagine, a clever ruse. He gets in contact with his bank, he reports that bank cards are stolen or lost, and he says that unauthorised use of his account has occurred and that he didn't recognise certain transactions. He didn't recognise Amazon transactions and Asda transactions, clearly trying to give himself a reality for those being bought, even though they weren't necessarily for him. Friday the 5th of June, he goes to Morrison's and he collects the Amazon purchases. Then he goes straight to Friant Country Park, Wembley, northwest London, and he's carrying his rucksack. So he's ready. He's gone out with an intention, hasn't he? In that same park that he's heading to, sisters 27-year-old Nicole Smallman and 46-year-old Bibba Henry are celebrating. They're basically gone there for a birthday celebration. Now, this is June 2020, remember, so nation at this point is in coronavirus lockdown, and because lockdown was apparent and everyone was having to go and be places that they wouldn't ordinarily be because they weren't allowed in other places like pubs and clubs and all the fun places we might go when we are having a birthday, we had a limited amount of opportunities. So they went to the park. They chose a venue of the park so they could celebrate together. Simple as that. So that's why they're there. Bibba was a social worker. She actually lived in Wembley. And to let you know, Bibba's family described her as just such a passionate advocate for safeguarding vulnerable children and families. She was fully committed and dedicated to her job. Nicole, her sister, well, she was a freelance photographer, very creative individual, incredibly entrepreneurial, and she lived in Harrow. Now, the girl's mother was the venerable Mina Smallman. Now, she was the Church of England's first female archdeacon from a black and minority ethnic background, so deeply religious. Bibba and Nicole had arrived in the park around 7 p.m. that evening. They'd been carrying food and alcohol for the picnic. They were full of good spirits. They met with a group of friends, and it was all about celebrating Bibba's birthday. They'd watched the sunset, because the park is quite elevated, so the view over London is just absolutely beautiful. And it had been a really lovely hot day. The night was really warm. So they were just enjoying that feel-good experience, sharing space with their friends and their family, of course. Before they arrived at the park, they'd been out and bought picnic provisions from the Co-op in Kingbury, and they walked to the park, bags filled with blankets and pillows. They'd set out the picnic blankets, they'd had food and drink with their mates, and after the last friend had left, because the sisters had had such a lovely time, around midnight, this is when the last person went, Nicole and Bibba decided that they wanted to stay behind. They'd put up fairy lights, and it looked so pretty, and they just danced. Just think about that scene. Just two sisters, close, sharing that special moment, just allowing themselves to relax and unwind and celebrate after hard months of lockdown. And that image really stays with me, it haunts me, because what I'm going to describe is about as far away from what they were experiencing. Their expectations of how that night was going to play out ended in the most harrowing, horrific and nightmare-orientated experience for the both of them. But there they were, just relaxing, dancing, having fun. They had loads of photos that evening. They had videos, and that was actually recorded on their phones. And it showed, when they look back at the footage, they were having an absolutely great time. In fact, they set up a camera. They took more than 100 pictures, just in various poses, using a clicker with them both together. But they were vulnerable. They didn't know it, but they were on their own, and close by, there's a predator. And that predator is lurking and waiting and watching. There they are, distracted by the lights and the music, completely unaware of the wolf that's in the midst. Danyal Hussein had seen the lights, had his backpack, he's ready to kill. And it's late now. There's very few people around. He can see that they are available and they are vulnerable, and they're also desirable. Remember the pact that he's made. These are two women. He said he's going to kill 6 in 6 months. He had actually been lying in wait there for about 4 hours, watching them. He was stalking those sisters. He's got his kill kit. He's armed with one of the knives that he's got from the knife block that he'd bought. He's there for one purpose: murder. He's even wearing disposable latex gloves. Now, I cannot go into great detail as to exactly what happened, because Hussein basically refused to cooperate with the police, and he actually pled not guilty to all counts, unbelievably, at his trial. He also refused to give evidence, so I'll talk about that later on, but this gives you an insight as to why I can't go into any graphic details. Not that you want to know the graphic details of how these poor women died, but this is why I can't go into any more detail than I'm going to right now. What we know is that Danyal Hussein launches the most brutal knife attack on the 2 unsuspecting, helpless and completely defenseless women, the sisters who are just enjoying themselves. Now, the last picture that's taken of Bibba and Nicole, it's about just before 1 a.m. It shows them distracted. So they look like they're looking to their left, something out of shot. And the police believe that this is the moment that Hussein strikes. So that picture that was set, taking lots of different ones throughout the night for them, it just seems to capture something where their attention looks like they're seeing somebody or something that's worrying them. And no more photos were taken after that. Hussein brutally murders the sisters. He does it in a public place. He inflicts horrific wounds on both of them. Bibba's stabbed 8 times. It's believed that she actually died first. She didn't have any defence wounds. Chances are that means that she was taken completely by surprise. She didn't put up a fight, but that won't be because she didn't want to. It's because she won't have had an opportunity to. Her sister did, though. Nicole suffered 40 stab wounds and incisions. She got many injuries to her arms. There were lots of defence wounds, and it's awful to imagine that she likely saw her sister murdered in front of her and she couldn't save her. And essentially, no matter how she tried, she couldn't save herself as well. However, because she struggled, because she didn't comply with that situation, she managed to ensure that Hussein really badly cut himself on his right hand. And that's really important, because imagine the amount of DNA evidence that happens there because he's bleeding. At some point as well, he drops the murder weapon. Now, when you think about the attack I've just described, that is a blitz attack. Overkill. Far more injuries were inflicted there than needed to be to cause death. So this is an individual who is rageful. And it's a very intimate way of killing, isn't it? Stabbing somebody that way, particularly 40 times. So it demonstrates his psyche. He's not just wanting to murder, he's wanting to ravage, destroy, dehumanise, take out the pent-up rage within him. After he's killed both the sisters, he moves their bodies, he drags them basically 75 metres into undergrowth and bushes, and they know that because the autopsy report said there were lots of abrasions and scratches on both of the victims' backs because they've been dragged across the ground. What is unbelievably sick is that if it wasn't bad enough what he's just done to these poor innocent women, these good citizens, because they were really good citizens, they were needed in our world, and he just destroyed them. And he destroyed them likely knowing they were celebrating as well. Maybe it was watching them dance together, clearly loving one another as sisters that he couldn't bear because he didn't know what it was like to feel cared for in the way that they cared for each other. Maybe he'd never managed a relationship that they had achieved. But he actually poses the bodies and he leaves the sisters in an embrace. So when they're found, it's clear that the killer has done that. He takes Bibba and Nicole's mobiles, and for whatever reason, he wanders around the park for quite a long period of time, and he's trying to unlock one of them, but it causes it to lock at 1:26 a.m. Chances are he was probably going to send some texts to make out that they were absolutely fine. You know how these kind of individuals do. They kind of come up with these ridiculous ideas that if they text a family member saying, we've decided to leave and go and get jobs in Australia, that people will be like, oh, it's a kill, it's fine, they'll never contact us again, we won't have to worry about it. You'd be amazed at how many killers do that. So now he's failed to open the phones. He needs to get rid of them, so he throws them into the pond. Again, he's probably trying to conceal the crime at this point. He also clears away the blood-soaked picnic blanket and cushions. His clothes at this point, by the way, are literally covered in blood. So he removes his top and he wraps it around his injured hand because that's bleeding, takes off his bloody trousers, and he literally walks through the streets half naked to his father's house. Not forensically sophisticated. Believe me, in this area of London, a guy walking around in his underpants is going to get noticed on CCTV. So even though he thinks he's avoided being seen with blood all over him, he's now somebody who's seen walking around in the middle of the night in his underpants. Not the brightest spark when it comes down to committing crimes, is he? He gets to his dad's around 4:10 a.m. and at some point he's disposed of the bloodied trousers. They actually never found them. Also, that cut to his hand was so bad that later that day, he needed to go to hospital to have it sorted out. And CCTV shows him going into the hospital with his father, Kamal, to get treatment. He has this story where he says, look, I got attacked by a group of lads. He then told another doctor that he'd been mugged. They did treat his wounds and it was so severe, they required stitches. He also had to then go back for a follow-up second time because he needed further treatment. Each time he kept giving different versions as well about how he suffered the injuries, which of course get recorded. So now we've got inconsistencies in his story. Meanwhile, whilst this is all going on, clearly Bibba and Nicole have disappeared. So there is real concern. This is an incredibly close family. This is a very loving, connected family. So the fact that they've not been in contact is deeply worrying. Friends and family can't contact them by phone. So they begin searching and they start searching the park because that's where everyone had seen them last. They also report them missing later that day. That's Saturday the 6th of June. Really frustratingly, and actually I think disgustingly, the police don't show any interest. They aren't really concerned. As far as they're concerned, Bibba and Nicole are old enough to go out and do what they want. They just put it down to them probably carrying on celebrations, even though the family is saying, no, this is not the case. This is not the normal behaviour. It drives me mad, this. It really does. And I can speak from experience of being involved with services where they don't bloody listen to you. You can say, look, this is completely out of character for my father or my sister or whatever, and they just ignore you. And it's just so distressing because you know what your family is like. And if they have disappeared and they are usually in contact with you, there is a strong possibility something terrible has happened to them. And we all know that the first few hours, it's basically life and death. Because let's put it into the best possible potential. Somebody's seriously injured. Well, those few hours are going to mean that they survive, aren't they? Whereas if you leave them, they're going to die. So for the family, it's distressing. And Bibba and Nicole's mother is the one who has to organise the search. It's not until the morning of the 7th of June that the bodies are discovered. And what makes this even more harrowing is that Adam Stone, that's Nicole's boyfriend, he finds them. He's on the phone to the police on his mobile when he suddenly discovers them. Can you put yourself in that position? Their worst fears. I mean, I don't even imagine that they'd allowed themselves to go to that place. But because the police hadn't been searching, it was left to the family to find those sisters. Nicole's boyfriend. He now says that when he found them, his life changed completely. Of course it did. He actually referred in court in the victim impact statement that he is still dealing with massive ongoing torment and trauma because those images are scorched into his mind. In fact, he said, I will never ever be able to unsee what I saw. I totally connect with that on so many levels. I totally do. It's burned into your mind when you see something horrible and harrowing and tragic, particularly when it involves somebody that you love. It's burned into your mind. You could paint it. You could literally recreate it in Technicolor because it's such an unusual situation to experience. And I completely relate to what he goes through, that reality of seeing his lover, his partner, in the arms of her dead sister. Horrific. He also is the person who finds the murder weapon. Imagine this. Where are the police? That this man has had to deal with all of this. He's found not only the bodies, but now he's found the murder weapon. It's got bloodstains all over it. The later analysis of that weapon found both Danyal Hussein's and Nichols' DNA on it. So again, they are building a very strong case. At this point, the police descend on the park and they start searching for evidence. It's just terrifying as well, because think about it. The police should have been there from the get-go, because you all know that things can get contaminated. If the way evidence is looked after isn't acceptable or appropriate, it means that it won't get taken to court. So it's really problematic. You need to make sure that the whole of the area that's dealing with that murder is cordoned off so no one can screw it up. But anyway, they finally get there. They find a bottle of tonic water that was bought by the sisters at the co-op. They find that dumped in a bush nearby. The bottle's got blood in it. Again, later matches Hussein's DNA. Then pretty immediately, the police also see CCTV and they start seeing Hussein on it, and it's linking him to the murder scene. So firstly, he's caught on camera walking into the park on the day of the murders, and then he's seen returning to his father's house after 4 a.m. without his trousers on. Without his trousers on. In total, police actually trawl through about 450 hours of footage to establish where Danyal Hussein has been, movement-wise, on the day of the murder, but also in the months leading up to it. I mean, they have a lot of breaks, but around a month after the murders, one of the things that connects is they have familial DNA, which matches to Hussein's father. So he had basically been cautioned in the past, and they'd taken a DNA sample, and now they have connected the two. So completely bang to rights at this moment in time. They have got CCTV footage, they've got him at the scene of the crime, and now they've got DNA evidence. So massively strong case. The police raid the father's address. Danyal Hussein isn't there at the time. Early on, 1st of July, police raid mother's address in southeast London. And that raid is heavy duty. I mean, they are armed officers with tasers. And Hussein is located inside. He's told to put his hands on his head.
Put your hand first, mate, you're under arrest. Come out. Come out the address. Keep walking towards me. Keep walking towards me. Stay where you are. Stay where you are. Stay where you are. Hands on your head. Stay where you are. Face me. Hands on your head. Stay where you are. You're under arrest, all right?
The officers tell him he's under arrest on suspicion of murder. Tells him that he's been linked to 2 murders in Freyent Country Park on the 6th of June 2020. And Danyal Hussein responds, yeah, that's me. The police also notice that he's got cuts to his right hand and 3 sets of stitches. And he then says to the police, oh, well, I was robbed. So even though he's kind of said, yeah, that was me, I'm the person who's done that murder, he's not acknowledging the issue about being cut by the knife. The officers also said there was something really disconcerting about Danyal Hussein in the fact that he was incredibly calm. When you think that you've just been arrested for a double homicide, you would imagine some kind of emotion, but there is just flat effect. He just doesn't respond. He does tell the police officers that he suffers from autism. He also says that he's feeling very scared and confused, and says that he has Asperger's syndrome. Now, obviously, Asperger's syndrome and autism is the spectrum. In fact, people just relate to autism these days. But nonetheless, that might be a classification that he was given when he was younger, and he still uses the term Asperger's syndrome. But the fact that he isn't able to demonstrate that emotion, that's actually quite common. So just because he has flat effect and the officers think that it's disconcerting that he doesn't seem to show any emotion, if you have an issue with communicating your feelings, and people with autism often do, then the chances are that you might not act in a way that they would be used to. So we can't say that he wasn't feeling really scared and confused. We can just say that he didn't come across as seeming to be scared and confused. However, he clearly states he was. The officers then search a bedroom. They find a blue latex glove, a balaclava and a shovel, so really incriminating evidence. Also, folded up on a glass shelf of a TV unit is his agreement with King Lucifuge Rufakal. Not the best thing for the police to find, a basic written contract with said demon about murdering people. It's been written on green paper, it's been signed in blood. And the police unfolded it, and it read, for the mighty King Lucifuge Rufakal, perform a minimum of 6 sacrifices every 6 months for as long as I am free and physically capable. Sacrifice only women. Build a temple for you. do everything that I have promised. For me, win the Mega Millions super jackpot, to receive fruitful reward in return for the future sacrifices I make to you. The rewards could consist of wealth and power, to never be suspected of any crimes by the police, and also that the police will never know of any crimes that I have done and that I will do. Signed by me, Danyal. There was also an empty space next to King Lucifer's Rofakar's name for the demon to leave his mark. Note to all of you, never agree a contract unless it's signed. So, just saying, clear rookie mistake. If you're going to make a deal with a demon, they are crafty little buggers. You want to make sure that if you've signed it, they've signed it as well before you do anything. Standard legal procedure. I imagine it's the same in hell. He'll know one day when he's sent there. Next to that note, there were 3 lottery tickets for Lotto, Thunderball and Euro Million draws. None of them won. Yeah. I'm not making light of what he went ahead and did. I'm saying none of those tickets won because clearly Danyal Hussein is living in cloud cuckoo land regarding the reality of what he thinks may happen if he goes ahead and plays out these incredibly strange fantasies. Now, the police actually established in the 10 days after the murders, Danyal Hussein spent £162.88 on lottery tickets and bets, and he didn't have any success. Police also found several pieces of paper and cardboard paper. A lot of these had satanic symbols drawn on them in really thick black ink. When they searched the computers and mobile devices, it had so much far-right and violent satanic material that he was accessing on it. On the forums, when they traced the forums, he was discussing spells, love potions, which were all linked to satanic ideology. And the officers also established that he'd spent a lot of time researching the far-right in general. In fact, he'd been on the satanic forum and been very active on it just before the detectives raided his family home. So what does that tell you? Remember, there's been a month that's passed by. He's probably thinking that he's got to go ahead and kill others because he said 6 in 6 months. So this is somebody who was not giving up on the hope that he was going to have this pact play out and he was going to become successful and wealthy and have lots of women. So the police got there really in the nick of time. I mean, the narcissism in this case is unbelievable, isn't it? This complete misplaced self-confidence in his ability to actually evade the police. Because think about what we've just talked about, right? This guy left a trail of evidence at every stage. So that's from the planning to the actual commission of the crime. Now, the police believe if he hadn't injured his hand, the likelihood is he would have gone on and killed more people that night. So that brave woman fighting him, and yes, she lost her life, she's probably the reason why other people didn't die. Because he had that injury, he couldn't hold objects. So holding a knife, fighting would have been problematic. And it was that injury in itself that meant that he had to go away to heal. To this day, just to put it in context, by the way, when the police investigated that case, there are things they still haven't been able to access. So they haven't been able to access Hussein's full browsing history. This is after seizing all of his electronic devices. That was including an iPad that was in his bedroom. He was absolutely objectionary at every point. He just created obstacles constantly. So because he constantly put these barriers in the police's way, by not giving them access, by not giving them passwords, by not giving them passcodes, the problem was that they can't unearth the reality and the depravity of some of the communication potentially that he was having with people. And unfortunately, that means that the police can't get a full understanding and profile of his mindset. And also, you know, the important bit as well, the communications that he has with others, because how many other people are thinking this way and communicating this way? Police believe that he was exposed to really sick teachings of incel groups. Now, this is what I was talking about before. This is a group that has basically become quite a murderous movement. So an incel refuses to accept responsibility for the circumstances, basically. They say that the reason that they are the way that they are is because women are attracted to them. And they genuinely say this. They say that they are an oppressed group because women don't fancy them. I mean, the world has gone a bit woke, hasn't it? With some crazy ideas. But I think this beats it. This beats all the woke, crazy ideas, doesn't it? It's not my fault I'm not very attractive to you. It's your fault that you're not attracted to me. Therefore, I have a right to hate you. So it's a form of really deep online misogyny. They believe that men are the true victims of gender depression. Now, don't get me wrong, with respect, definitely in recent years, I think that men definitely have some kind of feelings of being treated unfairly at times. And I think that we have to listen to that. I think that when there is a rage towards women, we also have to acknowledge what is happening about the voices of certain individuals that feel that they need to be heard. I get that. And sometimes being a man in our society can involve being attacked for just being male. And that must be very painful for men, because the vast majority, the vast majority of men are really good. Okay? And the idea that men have got a massive upper hand in society just isn't necessarily as true as we might want to believe it is. And that's me as a feminist saying that, because if we're going to say that men have it really easy, we also have to accept, well, if that's the case, why are the majority of people on the streets male? Why are the majority of people in prison male? Why are the majority of people who are on very low incomes or out of work male? Because actually there is, to some degree, issues there as well. And I'm not saying that misogyny doesn't exist, it bloody does, and that women's rights don't need to be championed, they absolutely do. I'm saying that when there are these break-off groups that are giving us a message, albeit a deeply delusional belief system that they have about women, it still is something that we need to acknowledge, right? But these incels are, wow, extreme, beyond belief. So they literally, on these forums, by the way, you can check this out, they call for women to be stripped of their rights and forced to serve as state-mandated girlfriends or held in concentration camps. Bit of a leap. On one hand, you want me to be mandated for you, a bit like the Handmaid's Tale, as a girlfriend, because you can't actually connect with women. And if I say no, I end up in a concentration camp. So you can see this completely over-the-top idea of, well, if I can't have you, then to the gas chamber with you. That's the kind of mindset these individuals have. And we have to see that as a big problem, because this group of individuals, they are growing. They also justify extreme violence against women. And that in itself is terrifying. And like I said, it's really easy when you hear about incels, particularly the ones who go out and talk about this openly on forums, that they aren't harmful, they're just weird, strange men who have such poor sexual prowess that they have to hang out online and chat to other people like that. Well, that's not the case, because more and more we've seen incidents of incels going out and murdering innocent people, including the case I'm talking about today. So this is not something that we can say is fringe behaviour that's kept on the fringes of society in forums. This plays out in horribly damaging ways. In fact, like I said, look at what I'm talking about today. 2 women, sisters, dancing in a park celebrating, and now they're dead because of this guy. The trial begins on the 9th of June 2021 at the Old Bailey in London. A lot of the facts about this case, so especially those surrounding Hussein's mindset, basically remain a mystery, because he didn't answer police questions, he wouldn't commit to exploring what had gone on with them, he wouldn't give evidence at the trial. He even pled not guilty to Biba and Nicole's murders, and he pled not guilty to possession of knives in public. Bear in mind they've got him on camera, but he says not guilty. So, one, this shows that he's got no remorse, deeply concerning, isn't it? Totally remorseful, overwhelming evidence, but refuses to acknowledge that he did it. But then, even more, because he says not guilty, he has to drag the victims' families through the court process. And this is insane, isn't it? Because when you think about culpability, it's obvious that they have him as a culpable party. His blood and DNA is all over the murder weapon, at the crime scene, and even on the bodies of his victims. He was treated at hospital, it's on CCTV. He's lied to the doctors about how he got his injury. CCTV itself shows him in the vicinity of the crime scene. They've got records in CCTV of purchases from Amazon, Asda, Morrison's. They've got the written agreement that he'd signed in blood, stating he had an intention to kill women, and also that confession when the police actually arrested him. But he refused to accept a single piece of evidence linking him to the murders. A single piece. Now, as I've noted, there were no sensible explanations given by Danyal Hussein in the court proceedings about why all of this DNA and this CCTV existed, because what he said, obviously thinking, well, I've got to make something sound like I'm innocent, so I'll give some kind of reasoning behind how I ended up on CCTV. And the easiest way to do this is to say, somebody's photoshopped my face onto the footage. Now, I mean, I don't know, I appreciate there's deep fake, but I think that's a pretty mastered kind of thing to do, because to be somebody who photoshopped somebody's face onto CCTV footage, you'd have to work for the organisation in charge of the CCTV. And the likelihood of the murderer actually being somebody who worked there and could get Danyal walking through the streets in his underpants and then, you know, all these things, it's ridiculous, isn't it? But that's what he says. And he says that basically people have planted the evidence, all of it. So his blood, I mean, Danyal, we've not been thinking this through, have we? We've not been thinking this through, Danyal. Wouldn't you know who had actually done that if you had had yourself attacked that way? You know, wouldn't the police be aware of you having somebody come and take your blood? Oh, I don't know, you're a psychic vampire. You could do anything, couldn't you? You should have known, shouldn't you, Danyal Hussein? Because being a psychic vampire, you know, you're going to be able to predict stuff, aren't you? Is it just me? Anyway, the thing about this is, even though he tries to create this sense that this is a mystery murder, he's the perpetrator. I cannot believe that he put the family through what he put the family through. They had to hear graphic details of these utterly horrific injuries that their loved ones sustained. And the fact that he refused to give evidence during his trial but put them through it. Now, I am not going to pretend for 1 minute that I don't think that there were some mental health issues, that I do. But again, we have a problem. I can't evidence it here because there was no report medically on Hussein presented at the trial, because he simply would not accept responsibility for the offences. So the problem is, because he didn't plead guilty, there's no reason to kind of look at these mitigating factors, is there? Which would usually happen, you know, oh, I'm guilty, I did kill these people, but there are reasons behind it. My mental instability is a part of that. So we don't know. The jury was, of course, made aware of his autism, but the jury was also shown all the images of those lovely sisters dancing in the park on the day they were murdered. And they were shown those final images as the sunset had set and the night had fallen. And there they were in the dark with the fairy lights, just celebrating their birthday. 6th of July, the jury finds Hussein guilty on all counts. For the sentencing stage, Judge Mrs. Justice Whipple, well, she orders independent medical assessments by consultant forensic psychiatrist, Dr. Ian Cumming. He said it was really difficult because when you do a full assessment, you obviously have to have the individual engaging with you. But Danyal Hussein was just opposed to it, and he apparently interacted very, very little with Dr. Cumming. Although Dr. Ian Cumming did say that he agreed with the diagnosis of autistic spectrum disorder. Also, he was very clear, and this is important for any of you listening, because I think this is where it can get really dangerous when we talk about classifications or mental instability or any of these things around the psychological or psychiatric experience of an individual who's in court for a crime. The truth is that that does not explain why he went out and killed. And this psychiatrist said, you know, there is no reason at all that autism would create this kind of action, not at all. Also, he did say that even though it was quite a difficult assessment, he did feel that there was some form of personality disorder. He thought there was psychopathy there, but he couldn't establish for certain that these were absolute definites. I think, even though it's not my job to assess and diagnose this, but I think for the purposes of my YouTube channel, we can think about psychopathy certainly being a potential strong classification. Let's think about that. Brutally murders 2 women in a meticulously planned attack. Why? For personal gain. Also, shows no emotion or remorse. It's pretty much exactly what we would expect to see in somebody classified as a murderous psychopath. But like I said, I can't classify. Just throwing it out there that if it fits ABC and it's the letters ABC, then it is psychopath. So anyway, the overall medical opinion when they look at Danyal Hussein is that he didn't actually suffer from any mental health condition that could justify in any way his actions. So he wasn't, for example, massively psychotic in that moment and out of his mind, dealing with some horrific paranoia and suspicion and acting outside the realms of his normal rationale. That just didn't fit. They thought he was sane. When Danyal Hussein was actually sentenced, because COVID was raging on his prison wing, he actually did it through video link from HMP Belmarsh. So he was sentenced that way. And let me tell you, he was horrible. I mean, I can't think of a professional word to use, so I'm just going to say it. He was seen smiling, tossing his face mask in the air before the proceedings began. Bear in mind, he's being sentenced for the brutal and completely inexcusable, unnecessary, reprehensible murder of 2 amazing women. And he's just having a laugh. During the sentencing, the judge stated that Hussein's motivation was absolutely bizarre. The fact that he made a pact with the devil. However, obviously, they also accepted it was his belief system. I think that for me personally, there is potentially a mental health issue there because of the fact that he's kind of stuck to this idea that what he believes is real. Like I said, Richard Ramirez, the Night Stalker, he stuck with Satanism until he died. Absolutely believed that Satanism was a belief system that was something that he held completely in esteem and believed fully in the devil. And the judge actually tells Danyal Hussein that clearly the only appropriate sentence was mandatory life imprisonment, but she has to decide what is the minimum term acceptable. There were really few mitigating factors. I mean, one is he was only 18 when he committed the offences. I agree, younger people maybe deserve more leniency than somebody in their 40s. Maybe not, but it tends to be that when they're younger, the idea of reparation, restorative justice and potential future where they don't commit crime, as long as they're given the right opportunities, is possible. We also know that another mitigating factor was that the whole life term was off the table because he's under 21. So he can't get a full life term, as in he can't be like Joanna Dennehy and Rose West in prison forever. So it comes down to the fact that they have to decide an appropriate length of sentence. And also another mitigating circumstance is that there's no criminal record. He's not got any criminal previous history. But remember, this is a balance sheet. We've got the mitigating factors, very few of them, mostly his age. But the aggravating factors, let's look at those. So first of all, time and location of the offences. It was committed under the cover of darkness, early hours of the morning. It was in a very public place. The victims had every single right to be there. He repeatedly attempted to conceal evidence. He tried to hide the bodies in the hedgerow. He hid picnic items. He threw the mobiles in the pond. He got rid of blood-stained trousers, disposed of other knives he bought, lied to hospital staff about his injuries, falsely claimed unrecognised transactions on an account. Horrific nature of killings, obviously, and posing of the bodies post-mortem was also considered an aggravating factor. So there's a hell of a lot of aggravating factors. He's not acting in a moment of spontaneous madness, is he? All of these show there are massively planned, calculated reasoning behind his actions. They are big red flags when it comes down to sentencing. Now, when the judge tells him the sentence, you know what he does? He turns away from the camera. That is power play. That's letting the judge know that he's not interested. Now in America, you know how that would work, wouldn't you? They'd be like, you're going to get 17, you're going to get 65 years. That's how it is in the States, isn't it? I've seen it happen where somebody's disrespectful to a judge and they're just like, well, you've got another 15 years. But in the UK, they're not quite the same in that respect. But what the judge says is, you planned these vicious attacks, you intended to kill, and you did it for money and misguided pursuit of power. And she was right. He was ultimately sentenced to a minimum term of 35 years for each murder, 18 months for the possession of a knife in a public place, to run concurrently. Mrs. Justice Whipple stated, "You have found these two women. You're a stranger to them. You surprised them. You terrified them. And you killed them." The judge praised the jury, said it had been a really harrowing case. She praised the legal team and court staff. She praised the police investigation. She also praised the family of Bibba Henry and Nicole Smallman because they were so dignified throughout that trial and sentencing. The judge actually stated, no family should have to endure this. In victim impact statements, the family members expressed how their lives had been shattered. The sister's mother, Wilhelmina, said, "Every day is a nightmare, living with the horror of knowing the details of how they died, haunted by the knowledge of her children's suffering." She stated, "I think that will disturb me for the rest of my life." And the worst bit is, the whole family had to put their grief on hold because of the trial. When you look at this case, you also have to acknowledge, don't you, that Danyal Hussein wasn't thinking about killing two people. He was thinking about serially killing people. He planned to be a serial killer. Now, it ended up in a case of double murder. But we can see that the future would have certainly been full of killings if he'd got away with it. Of course, when we look at his history, it's quite unusual, isn't it? No previous criminal convictions at all. His first offence was a double murder. You know, offenders tend to build up to violent offences against people, but he seems to have arrived with that incredible violence in that moment, and it's quite shocking for his age as well. It's clear that when we look at him, if we're looking about killing per se, he's a visionary killer, isn't he? It's based on his really warped beliefs. He's also a blitz killer because of the savage brutality of that particular attack. And when you think about him as an offender, he's kind of mixed when it comes down to organised and disorganised. You know, the whole crime was meticulously planned, but there was a massive blitz execution style, and the forensic evidence was highly unsophisticated. It was very poor. He left so much evidence. After Danyal Hussein was sentenced, nearly 40,000 people signed a petition calling for criminal charges to be brought against two police officers who actually were involved in the case. And I'll tell you why. Because shockingly, those two police officers took and shared selfies of the double murder scene. They took selfies of themselves posing next to the dead bodies. That's PC Dennis Jaffa, 48, PC Jamie Lewis, 33. Posing next to the dead bodies of those two innocent sisters. Where's the dignity? Where's the professionalism? Those officers were arrested and charged with misconduct in public office. And it's bad enough that they did that. But what they also did was they risked contaminating a crime scene. They could have screwed up that case. What does that say about their ego? It's appalling. And for that family, that poor mother, her two daughters being used in that way, just devastating. Now, they pleaded guilty, and the truth is that they're probably going to face custodial sentences because it was really, really bad what they did, and the consequences of their actions could have been catastrophic for the case. Also, lots of criticism has occurred of the police because the way that they handled the calls from the sisters' worried relatives, it was inadequate. And in fact, an independent office for police conduct found it to be inadequate. They did nothing for 36 hours. And at that point, the bodies were found by the relatives. It's also worth noting that when a relative rang up about the sisters' disappearance and where they might be, the police closed down the logs and the actual information was recorded inaccurately. So that family were left to do the work themselves. Now, Bibba and Nicole's mother, of course, she's dealing with horrific grief, but she's also really angry. She feels like the police didn't take care of her children. They didn't take it seriously. And she thinks that they made some assumptions about her daughters, firstly because they were two black women, and secondly because they came from a council estate. And it's also alleged that there is some inherent racism in the way that cases of women who are black going missing are covered. They believe that the deaths are covered in a different way. When a stranger kills a white woman, it seems to get a lot more gravity. And because of that, it's something that I think needs to be brought into the public domain, where people feel completely dissatisfied with the way that the police treat certain situations. One of the things I would say about these murders is that it did seem to light up a discussion about women needing to be more safe in our society, and how wrong it is that two innocent people can be murdered in such a heinous way whilst just enjoying a night with their friends when they're meant to be celebrating a birthday. I mean, you should be able to go anywhere and enjoy that experience without fear for your life. And the worst bit is, it hasn't got better in spite of this discussion, because the next year, literally in the last year itself, Sarah Everard was murdered by a serving police officer, Wayne Couzens. I've actually covered that case. If you've not heard it, it's unbelievably brutal and terrifying. PCSO Julia James, well, she was murdered, and her suspect of the murder, Callum Wheeler, he's due to stand trial. It's one I'll cover in the future. And also Sabina Nisa, suspect Kosi Selamaj, he's also currently on trial, one I'll cover in the future. So this is an amazing amount of women in the past year and a half who've lost their lives to strangers murdering them. Now, of course, it's difficult because we want to make the world a safe place for women, but it's very hard to legislate against random psychopaths. It's not the same as when we see violent men in homes or violent people in society who are constantly in trouble with the police because of their backgrounds and so on and so forth. We're talking about random psychopaths who crop up now and again. And the reason I say that is because, like I said, when we're talking about men who meant to be curfewed at 6 o'clock, that was one of the suggestions. You know, that's horrifying. That's not what a decent civilized society does. It doesn't lock up all the men who are really good to save women from the ones who are really bad. And I'll tell you why, because the ones who are really bad won't listen and will just go about their business doing harm anyway. So we have to be clear that we have to do better. Yes, as a society, we have to take things more seriously when women go missing, without a doubt, but we can't just throw blame at men. We can't. Also, just so you're aware, since 2019, 6 young men, 5 of them teenagers, have actually been convicted of extreme right-wing terrorism offences connected to a violent form of Satanism. Now, some start with a really far-right ideology and they then progress to explore the extreme right. This means that they end up influenced by very cruel and violent occult ideas. And when you think about those two extremes, the far right and the occult, it encourages the absolute worst in human nature. Hussein will remain a perfect example of this. He'll also remain in prison until he's 54. So at least the streets are safe until then. And I hope to God that he's getting the right kind of intervention in prison, because it seems to me that to have those kind of predilections and interests, potential action and offending at an age that he has, that he's going to need some very strong guidance, conscious work, compassion training, and serious help if he's ever going to be allowed to walk our streets. Because believe me, with his MO, they won't be safe with him on it. Just want to note as well, this is a recent crime, and for that family, it is impossible for me to conceptualise what it would be like to lose 2 sisters in that way. It will be a stain on their family for the rest of their lives, and one that they never deserve to endure. And like I always say, everybody knows my belief system. I do believe that both of those girls will be dancing in heaven, and I do believe that Danyal Hussein will have an elevator straight to hell. So one day, balance as it should be will hopefully occur. only my beliefs. Everyone's entitled to their own beliefs, but not the occult and far right. You're not entitled to those. I hope you found this case interesting. Like I said, I think we need to really think about incels and how certain demographics of individual are getting rageful around our society right now, and we need to think about how we can do better. Thanks for joining me. I look forward to my next one with you. Like I said, I'm going to cover the crimes that I've just been talking about, the people who are awaiting trial at the moment for those horrific murders that were carried out on innocent women. If you have enjoyed this, at least enjoyed the deep dive, not the actual reality of what I'm talking about, then please join me anytime you like on a Wednesday and Sunday, or anytime in between. But if you do like crime and consistency, I am your girl. Wednesday, Sunday, same time, every week. What more can you want? Well, quite a popcorn, wine, you know, winning Euro Millions ticket. See you then, guys. Take care.